The Great Contest. A king once, while traveling through his country, noticed a certain sadness was setting in among the people, and he, being a generally joyful person himself, worried about the weariness he witnessed. When he returned home, he summoned the regent that he had appointed to help him rule his kingdom. He communicated his concerns and asked for any ideas that might help elevate the mood and sense of well-being of his subjects. After consulting with others, the regent proposed that a grand new work of art should be commissioned. The nature of the work could be a great work of art or architecture, but it was to be something so striking that it would inspire everyone whenever they saw it and remind them of the greatness of their country. The king loved the idea. He proposed a contest to determine the most beautiful work. He would provide large sum of money for each project. He instructed that 3 artisans were to be chosen, and these would each then produce a masterpiece. At the end of 1 year, the king himself would choose the winner from among each of the 3 entries. And then that winning work would be installed where it could be most publicly enjoyed. The artisans could be chosen from anywhere, but the king stipulated that at least one of the contestants must be from the common people. When he heard this, the regent tried to dissuade the king that a commoner would be a waste of resources and that they would have no chance of winning, but the king insisted. By the first of the next month, the regent had already chosen 2 of his contestants very carefully. After all, he wanted to impress the king with a winning masterpiece, and he wanted to skim off some of the money for himself. So he chose first his son, and next his nephew, who had both received the highest education available in the land, and who both could find talented artists to do the actual work. For the 3rd entrant, not knowing any commoners himself, the regent told the people to choose someone who was known to be an excellent craftsman. After about a month of talking from town to town about this person or that person, they finally chose a wagon maker from the south end of the kingdom. When all the entrants had been selected, the king sent large sums of money to be distributed evenly among the artists. And since none of the artists knew how much had been sent, the regent could safely help himself to some of it before distribution. Then he had the balance of the funds delivered to each entrant. And now the work would begin. The aristocrats threw large parties and invited accomplished artists, architects, and engineers to suggest and design works that their patrons would later claim to be their own. Proposals of statues, mansions, paintings, even machines that could be used in war or commerce. Great ideas flowed, contracts were made, professionals hired, and each aristocrat partied like they had already won. Meanwhile, in the wagon maker's village, far from the revelries of his more royal rivals, the weight of this assignment began to sink in. The wagon maker gathered his friends and they tried to imagine something wonderful. But having never seen a painting or statue or machine or of any type, those pictures passed their powwow undetected. They finally figured that the only thing he knew well was wagons, so he would have to create the most beautiful carriage in the kingdom. While the upper-class artists paid their professionals, the wagon maker drew careful designs of his grand carriage. He would use mahogany from the East for the carriage itself, then gilding the entire outside with gold. He would cushion the seats and cover them with fine leather. Each feature would have to be just so. He hoped that the regent himself would choose it to be his personal carriage, and display it with pride as he toured around the province. When his plans were complete, he put in his requisition to the regent for the wood and the gold that would be needed. He used the money from the king to pay the full cost at requisition, to make sure there'd be enough, and kept any extra funds for later possible use. And then he waited. One day, while he was still waiting for supplies, his sister stopped in to see him and his wife. They could see that she was distraught and asked her the matter. She tearfully told them that her 4-year-old son was dying. He'd come down with a fever a few nights back and had gotten worse ever since. They knew she couldn't afford any medical attention, so they prayed with her for a while and ended up slipping her some money on her way out. She hugged them with great gratitude and hurried back to tend to her son. About a week later, the wagon maker took delivery on the wood he had ordered, so he started in with energy and joy. Each day he saw another piece take shape. After a couple of months, the chassis was completed, and he started in on the carriage itself. But it seemed that neighbors in need knew he offered a possible glimpse of relief. He wasn't surprised or suspicious of any of the requests for help. He knew that there had always been great needs among his family, friends, and most of the province. And each time he heard of a need, he'd look at the remaining money and figure there would still be enough. After all, he had already paid in advance for the wood and the gold, so a little more would be given away to help someone in need. The day came when the entire carriage had been completed. It was a marvel of excellent workmanship in polished mahogany. Now awaited only the gold for the gilding. He'd been asking the regent's people for weeks to please have the gold delivered, but there was always some kind of excuse standing in the way. But now the deadline was in view. It would take him weeks to gild this carriage, and every day wasted waiting would now cause that deadline to loom larger. What was holding up the gold? Could it still be done? What would happen to him and his family if he disappointed the regent, or even worse, the king? It happens that, beyond the wagon maker's knowledge, the regent had been delivering the gold. He'd been actually delivering extra gold to the aristocrats, who each ran short of money from the parties and needed extra finances to finish their projects. The regent figured the wagon maker would fail with or without the gold, so why deliver it? It soon became clear that there would be no time to gild the carriage, even if the gold showed up any more. The wagon maker almost collapsed under the weight of failing people who could ruin his life and his family. He cried out to God, but received nothing except the comfort of his wife, who reminded him that God might still have a plan. At last, Judgment Day arrived. With appropriate pomp, the king arrived to choose the most beautiful creation as the winner. First up, the regent's son, who had hired the actual artisan, proudly revealed a stunning golden statue of the king himself. The elegant entry elicited gasps from the crowd and seemed to impress the king. Then the nephew, who also merely hired the artisan, brought His Highness to see a magnificent bridge spanning the river that ran right through the middle of the capital city. Also gilded with gold, its beauty and practical purpose extremely impressed the king, who then inquired about the third entry. The wagon maker humbly presented himself and the wonderful yet ungilded carriage. He fell on his face before the king. "Please forgive me, your majesty. I was unable to obtain the gold to gild this gift." Do with me as you wish, but please have mercy on my family." "How can this be?" asked the king. "More than enough gold was sent to complete all three of these projects. Yours came from the northern mines, with the distinctive reddish patina. What did you do with it all?" "Your Highness," quaked the wagon maker, "I paid the full price months ago, but no delivery was ever made." "Is this true?" the king demanded of the regent. "It's obvious that this man is lying," said the regent defensively. "I warned your Highness that a local artisan may be too poor to be trusted with the royal funds. And I have personal knowledge that this man wasted much of his allotment by giving money to his friends and family. No doubt the gold was secretly squandered in a similar way." "Show me the delivery receipts," shouted the king, because the royal treasurer had wisely suggested signed receipts for each delivery. The papers were found and brought to the king. There were indeed 3 receipts for delivered gold, one for each artisan, but the delivery to the wagon maker had a signature that was as hard to make out as it was ornate. "Is this your signature?" the king asked the wagon maker. "No, sire. I'm a stranger to this or any delivery document." Turning again to the regent for an explanation, he defended himself. I assumed the wagon maker incapable of signature, so I had one of my staff note the deliveries as a matter of convenience. Now, before all this examining of the paperwork began, the king had a suspicion and had ordered 2 of his captains to ride back to the other 2 entries. They were now returning, and each gave the king a report. He then addressed the regent. "I am now told that both the statue and the bridge entries show evidence of much northern gold, and yet neither artisan was sent any from that region. And it didn't take much inquiry till your son and nephew confessed to what's been happening." In several swift swoops, the regent and both relatives were sentenced to life in prison for the misappropriation of royal funds. Their personal estates were confiscated and all wealth surrendered to the king. When their extravagant entries were deconstructed, the statue and the bridge were stripped of their gold. The king was further angered to find that each was made of a cheap wood base, showing them to be shameless shams of shoddy workmanship. The gold, at least, could be returned to the treasury, but anything more of value had been squandered. As far as the wagon maker, the king was so impressed with his wisdom, honesty, and compassion that he was immediately promoted to regent. And the carriage? The king was so taken with its beauty and quality that he declined to have it gilded at all. Instead, he ordered hundreds more of the same design to be built. The beautiful fleet became the first common transportation system ever designed. This ingenious system became the talk of every surrounding nation and the pride and inspiration of every citizen of the realm.